All right, so we're diving into worry and negativity today. You sent over some really fascinating material. Looks like we're focusing on excerpts from Buddha's Super Rational Thinking. I've heard good things. I think it was published in 2015. Became a bestseller on Amazon and still ranks highly with tons of positive reviews.
Yeah, definitely a popular one, and for good reason, I think. You know what's really interesting? The author, Kusunagi Ryujin, he's a Japanese Buddhist monk, and he uses Buddhist teachings to help people eliminate worry.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty unique approach.
Hmm.
I have to admit, when I think of Buddhist teachings, I kind of think of meditation retreats,
Yeah.
chanting, not necessarily like practical advice for everyday worries.
Yeah, and that's kind of the beauty of it, I think. He really emphasizes that Buddhist thought. It's rooted in reason and practicality. It's really about understanding, like, the nature of our minds and using that knowledge to deal with, life's challenges. He even calls it a science of the mind.
Oh, interesting. So no need for me to shave my head and move to a monastery then.
Well, not unless you want to, of course. But the point is, you don't have to be Buddhist to benefit from the insights. They're pretty universal principles, really. Anyone can apply them.
Okay, good to know. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is worry? Like from a Buddhist perspective.
Well, Buddhism actually has a really insightful framework for understanding worry. It's called the Eight Sufferings. They represent the fundamental sources of human anguish, kind of a roadmap to the things we all struggle with, regardless of background or beliefs.
Okay, so break down these eight sufferings for me. What are we talking about here?
Sure. So some of the most relatable ones are, suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Pretty universal, right?
Yeah, I'd say those are definitely unavoidable parts of life.
Exactly. Then there's the suffering of separation from loved ones, being stuck with things we dislike, not getting what we want.
Wow, yeah, those hit close to home.
Mhm.
Everyday struggles that can really get us down.
Right. And then finally, there's this fundamental suffering of our ever-changing existence. The idea is that everything is in constant flux, nothing stays the same, and that impermanence can actually be a source of anxiety for people.
It's like that feeling of always chasing after something, never quite feeling settled
Ta-da!
or content. Yeah.
Exactly. And all of these sufferings, they kind of point to one core issue: our inability to control certain things in life. It's that feeling of powerlessness that often fuels our worry. We cling to this desire for things to be different,
Yeah.
for things to go our way, but ultimately we don't have complete control over how things unfold.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like when you're stuck in traffic and you just start to get anxious and frustrated, right? Because you're basically powerless to change the situation.
Mhm.
Or when you're waiting for some really important news and you can't help but worry about the outcome, even though there's nothing you can do to influence it.
Yeah, perfect examples. It's that tension between wanting to control things and the reality that many things are simply beyond our control. And it's in that gap where our desires clash with reality. That's where worry takes root.
So we're kind of wired to crave control,
Yeah.
right? Especially in those situations that make us uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So how do we deal with that? Does Buddhism just tell us to try and eliminate anything that makes us feel like powerless?
Well, that's where things get pretty interesting, I think. Buddha doesn't actually say to eliminate those sources of discomfort. He offers a more uh, radical solution, I guess you could say: change your reaction to them.
Change our reaction. So not changing the situation itself, but how we respond to it. That's pretty different from what you usually hear, in those self-help books and stuff.
It is, and it's really powerful. It's about recognizing that our initial reactions to discomfort, those knee-jerk responses, they're often what causes the most suffering. So instead of trying to, like, force the world to conform to our desires, we can learn to shift our perspective, choose more skillful response.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this super rational thinking thing works. So it's about recognizing that those unhelpful reactions, like getting angry in traffic or, panicking when things don't go our way, they don't actually help the situation.
Exactly. They just add fuel to the fire, to our own suffering. But by becoming aware of those reactions and where they're coming from, we can start to loosen their grip on us.
So how do we actually do that? Like, how do we actually rewire ourselves to respond differently when those feelings of worry and discomfort pop up?
Well, the book outlines this three-step process. You can use it anytime you feel those familiar knots of anxiety.
Okay, lay it on me. What's step one?
Step one is articulation. Basically, you take that vague worry that's swirling around in your mind, and you force it to take shape. You put it into words, either out loud or write it down. Describe it clearly, as specifically as you can.
So instead of just feeling overwhelmed by this general sense of anxiety, we pinpoint exactly what we're worried about.
Yes. Think of your worry as a tangled ball of yarn, you know? By articulating it, you're starting to unravel that ball. You see the individual strands that make up the rest, like shining a light on something that's been lurking in the shadows.
I like that. It makes it feel a lot less intimidating.
Yeah. So the second step kind of builds on that and invites you to feel your feelings. Sounds simple enough. But a lot of us are really good at suppressing our uncomfortable emotions, right? We distract ourselves, we numb ourselves, but rarely do we actually just sit with those feelings and let ourselves like fully experience
Oh,
them.
yeah, I'm totally guilty of that. If I start to feel anxious, I immediately reach for my phone or turn on the TV, anything to avoid just sitting with that discomfort.
And that's totally natural. But the key is, instead of pushing those feelings away, try to turn towards them, like with curiosity. Close your eyes, tune out distractions, and actually feel the emotional state that you're in. Are you feeling anxious, sad, angry, frustrated?
So we get really specific with how we're feeling, not just labeling everything as stress or worry.
Exactly. And by naming those feelings, by allowing ourselves to experience them, we actually take away some of their power. It's no longer this like mysterious force controlling us. It becomes something we can acknowledge, understand.
Okay, so step one, articulate the worry. Step two, feel your feelings. What's the third step in this worry taming process?
Step 3 is where we analyze, we categorize the worry, trying to understand its root cause.
Categorize it. How many categories are we talking about here?
The book breaks it down into 3 main categories: desire-based worry, anger-based worry, and delusion-based worry. Each one kind of stems from a different source and requires a different approach.
Okay, so let's break those down. What's desire-based worry all about?
Well, desire-based worry is all about the things that we crave, those outcomes that we just like desperately want to happen. It's that feeling of, I need this to happen or I'll be miserable. It's fueled by attachment to specific outcomes, by those expectations that things will go a certain way. Like when you really, really want that promotion and you start to stress about, what will happen if you don't get it, or when you're fixated on finding the perfect partner and you start to worry that you'll be alone forever if you don't find them.
Yeah, it's a sense of urgency, right? Like our happiness depends on getting this thing that we want.
Yeah, and that's where the suffering comes in, because when our happiness is like so tightly bound to external circumstances, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. Because guess what? Things don't always go our way. And that's where that super rational thinking comes in. It's recognizing that our happiness doesn't have to depend on these, external things. We can find joy and contentment regardless of whether we get that promotion or find that perfect partner.
Makes sense. So how is anger-based worry different?
Anger-based worry is all about those situations that trigger, feelings of frustration, irritation, even rage. Think of that feeling when someone cuts you off in traffic and you feel that surge of anger, or when someone says something that just rubs you the wrong way and you find yourself like stewing about it for hours.
Oh, I know that one. It's like a little fire that starts burning inside you, and you can't put it out.
Yeah, it can really take over, consume our thoughts, and cloud our judgment. But here's the key. Anger-based worry is often rooted in a sense of injustice, like the feeling that something is wrong or unfair. And while it's important to acknowledge those feelings, it's equally important to recognize that our anger is often a reaction to something that we can't control. We can't control the other driver's actions. We can't control what other people say. But what we can control is our response.
So instead of letting that anger just like fester and control us,
Yeah.
we can choose to respond in a way that doesn't, escalate the situation or cause us more suffering.
Right. It might involve taking a few deep breaths, practicing some compassion towards the other person, or even just removing yourself from the situation. It's about finding healthy ways to process that anger without letting it take over.
Okay, so we've covered desire-based worry and anger-based worry. What about that third category? Delusion-based worry.
Yeah, that one's a biggie. Delusion-based worry, it's the master of mind games, really. It's fueled by those anxious thoughts, negative assumptions that just spin out of control, creating those worst-case scenarios that might not even be rooted in reality.
So it's that what-if worry that keeps us up at night replaying all those potential disasters in our heads.
Exactly. And it's often based on distorted thinking or, irrational beliefs. For example, you might worry about failing an exam even though you've studied hard and are well prepared. Or you might worry about, getting sick even though you're healthy and you take good care of yourself. It's that feeling of impending doom.
Yeah.
Like something terrible is about to happen even though there's no real evidence to support it.
Our minds are basically creating these elaborate horror movies, and we're the starring actors.
Exactly. And the problem is we often get so caught up in the story that we forget that it's just that, a story. We forget to question those thoughts, to challenge their validity.
So how do we break free when we're, caught in those delusion-based worry spiral?
Well, that's where mindfulness comes in. It's really powerful. By practicing mindfulness, we can learn to kind of observe our thoughts without getting like swept away by them. It's about creating space between ourselves and those anxious thoughts, recognizing that they're just, mental events, not necessarily reflections of reality.
So it's like hitting the pause button
Yeah.
on that mental movie
Yeah.
and saying, hold on a second. Is this even true? Is this really something I need to be worried about right now?
Exactly. And that pause, that moment of awareness, it can be so powerful. It allows us to choose a more skillful response instead of just reacting automatically.
Yeah. This whole idea of categorizing our worries has been really helpful, I think. It gives us a framework for understanding, where those worries are coming from and how to approach them in a more constructive way.
It's about taking that worry, that unease, and kind of transforming it into an opportunity for growth and insight.
Now, I'm curious, does the book offer any, proactive strategies
Yeah.
for preventing worry in the first place? It seems like a lot of what we've talked about is reactive, right? Like dealing with worry when it pops up.
Yeah.
But is there anything we can do to cultivate a more, I don't know, worry-free mindset from the start?
Yeah, absolutely. Kusunagi Ryujin actually offers several proactive tips, but 3 in particular I think are really helpful. The first one is so simple, but so often overlooked. Get outside.
Just step outside. How does that help with worry?
Well, nature has this amazing ability to, soothe our minds and shift our perspective. Even a short walk in the park, just a few moments spent breathing in fresh air, it can really help break that cycle of negative thoughts and bring us back to a state of calm and presence.
Yeah, I always feel more grounded, more clear-headed after I've spent time in nature. It's like those worries just kind of melt away, when I'm surrounded by trees and fresh air.
Right. The second tip is to embrace the big picture. Take a moment to just contemplate the vastness of the universe, the immensity of time and space.
Putting our problems into perspective, reminding ourselves that our worries, as big as they feel in the moment, are actually, pretty small in the grand scheme of things.
Exactly. When we zoom out and we see our lives within that larger context, those worries tend to lose their power over us. It's not that they completely disappear, but they become less daunting, more manageable.
I like that. It's a good reminder that we're all part of something much, much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the third proactive tip for preventing worry?
This one might be the most challenging, but also the most rewarding. Accept yourself. Recognize and embrace, your strengths and weaknesses.
Self-acceptance. Yeah, that's a tough one, I think, for a lot of people. It's easy to get caught up in comparisons, always striving to be better, smarter, more successful.
It's a trap a lot of us fall into. But the truth is, we're all perfectly imperfect. And when we can accept that, when we can, embrace those imperfections as part of what makes us unique, we release that pressure to be someone we're not.
It's about letting go of that need to constantly prove ourselves and just allowing ourselves to, to just be.
Exactly. And that kind of self-acceptance can be incredibly liberating. It frees up so much energy that we can then direct towards the things that truly matter to us.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive. I feel like I've learned so much, so many valuable tools for understanding worry, dealing with it. And it's not about eliminating worry altogether. It's more about approaching it with awareness, with skill, with more compassion for ourselves.
And remember, this is really just scratching the surface. There's so much more to explore in Buddha's super rational thinking. Well, we'll definitely have to revisit this in the future. But for now, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. Think about one worry you're carrying right now. How could you use what we talked about today to reframe that worry? Challenge those negative thoughts. Or to just simply acknowledge it and let it go. Remember, you have the power to choose how you respond.
You're not your worries. You're not your thoughts. You're so much more than that.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.